Welcome everybody to Michael Roberts Talks 2. This is another in the series that I've now launched as a series of YouTube videos on what's happening in the COVID crisis and in the world economy. And I've invited different experts, Marxist economists and others, to speak on different subjects. This particular one is going to be on the COVID virus crisis and mortality and the environment, and we are uniquely pleased to have Dr. Jose Tapia, who is not only a full medical doctor in the past, primary care, working as a doctor, he's also a PhD in economics, so he has two sorts of doctorates available to us, the top level of expertise. He works in the Department of Politics in the University of Drexel in Pennsylvania, United States. He has degrees in medicine, as I said, and he's worked now very much in the area of public health and health economics. And he used to work for the World Health Organization, obviously a prominent institution in the current crisis. But he's lived in the United States for the last 30 years. And not only has he looked at the question of health, mortality, and the environment, but also a whole range of economic subjects like crises in capitalism. He's co-author with Rolando Astarita from the University of Buenos Aires, a book in Spanish called The Great Recession in the 21st Century, something that is very pertinent to what I have tried to do my work in, and perhaps they were well ahead of me in coming towards the conclusions that they did reach. So we are really lucky to have Jose here. He's continually writing material on environmental issues. He's been quoted in the media on this current COVID crisis, in particular in the relationship between the impact of COVID on mortality and what recessions and the lockdowns would mean on the terms of mortality. Because as viewers may know, some argue that there'd be even more deaths if we have a recession on the lockdown than we're getting from COVID. And that issue is in the minds of many people when they consider whether we should be coming out of lockdowns and avoiding a recession. So I'm going to hand over to Jose to explain this to us and see what he has to say about all the issues that we've discussed here. Over to you, Jose.
Hello. Well, this is a short presentation on pandemics and economic crisis, and some facts to understand why we are in unknown territory. So this is a presentation on pandemics and economic crisis and some facts to understand why we are in unknown territory. Let me start with some inspirational quotations like this one by Edmund Burke, that those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. Or this one by Karl Marx, who commenting on a blue book of a statistical abstract for the United Kingdom, he said that dry as these figures are arrayed in close columns of the official print, they contain in fact more valuable contributions to the history of the national movement than volumes of rhetoric, claptrap, and political gossip. And then this quotation by Kurt Vonnegut, who is claiming that history is merely a list of surprises and it can only prepare us to be surprised yet again. Well, what are the basic ideas that I want to introduce here? First one is that economic crisis, that is recessions, or recessions, in other terms, in market economies have a mild paradoxical effect on health as they reduce mortality, while conversely, expansions slightly rise mortality. The second idea I want to present is that the mortality effects of the pandemic are orders of magnitude greater than the mortality effects of recessions and expansions. And the third idea is that in the past century, there has been basically just one pandemic in 1918, while there have been many business cycles of recession, expansion with economic crisis. Now, let's look first to the effect of the 1918 flu pandemic in two countries, Italy and Finland. In Italy, we have here a graph with this curve of annual deaths in millions between 1872 and 2017. We see that here annual deaths are going down in the long trend. This is probably because of health improvement, because of course the population of Italy was increasing, but in spite of that, annual deaths were going down up to this 1915 that they start to increase, and here there is a strong peak. Then they go down again and peak again in the 1940s. Well, these are the effects of World War I and the flu pandemic and World War II. That is more clearly seen when we present the same graph, but for males and females. Here in green, we see annual deaths of Italian males. We notice clearly this increase here because of World War I.
Yeah.
And this increase here because of World War II. Now, for females, World War I basically has no impact, but there is here the impact of the flu pandemic in 1918, and then here we see a very small impact of World War II. Okay, now let's look at the impact of the flu pandemic in different age groups. So these are annual deaths for 3 age groups in Italy. First, look at this group of children ages 1 to 4. We notice annual deaths are more or less flat all this period before the pandemic. And then in the pandemic, there is a very slight increase in annual deaths of children of this age. So that is very different from what happened with young adults ages 20 to 24. Here, the curve is more or less flat, but when we reach the World War I, these start peaking, and then in 1980, with the pandemic, there is a great peak again, and then, of course, another impact in World War II. And finally, we see the impact on ages 60 to 64. Deaths are going down, and then during the pandemic, there is a peak, but comparatively, the peak is much smaller in this group of ages than in the young adults at 2024. So, the 1980 pandemic killed mostly young adults and had negligible effect on small children and quite moderate effect on the elderly. In this sense, it's quite different to the present pandemic, which is affecting mostly the elderly, while children and young adults are much less affected. Let's look at the case of Finland. Well, we see again, looking at annual deaths, that they are more or less flat before 1915. Well, there are ups and downs. Probably some of them are epidemics of infectious disease that kill more people. But then here we have the peak caused by the world flu pandemic. Then annual deaths go down until the 1940s, and this is the effect of World War II in the Finnish population. When we look at males and females, we see very clearly how the flu pandemic in Finland has a much stronger effect in males, than in females. This is the peak for females, much lower than for males. And we notice very clearly how World War II impacted a lot on males, but very little in females. Now, using the case of Finland, let's examine the effect of economic expansions and recessions on debt. Now, this is the volume of industrial output in Finland between 1925 and 2005, indexed to 100 for 1938. Now, here we have the three periods of economic recession or economic crisis. One is the 1930s, the Great Depression. One is the recession of the late 1970s, and then is the recession of the 1990s, when the Finnish economy was hit by a world economic crisis, but also particularly by the demise of the Soviet Union, that was formerly buying a lot of Finnish goods. So suddenly Finnish lost a lot of exports. Now, looking at unemployment as another index of the conditions of the economy, we see very clearly the economic crisis of the mid-1970s, when unemployment rate goes from 2 to 7 or 8% in just 1 or 2 years. And this is the other great economic crisis on Finland in 1990. Here is when the Soviet Union disappears and all the Finnish exports are lost, and that moves the unemployment rate in Finland from 3% to about 18% in 2 years. Now, do we see any impact of these periods of economic crisis on annual debts in Finland? Well, this is the Great Depression in the 1930s. We don't see any impact on debts, and these debts are going down at that time. This is the 1970s. Again, debts are flat, no any evidence of an impact of the crisis. And here, this is the period of the economic crisis of the 1990s. Debts were going up from before. This is probably a demographic effect of the aging of the population of Finland. And this period of economic crisis don't generate any further increase in debts. Indeed, there is a fall here, but there is nothing evident showing any impact of this economic crisis on annual debts. But let's look at something more subtle. Is not the annual debts, but the death rate. The death rate is kind of the probability of death at a particular age. And it could be perhaps that economic crisis or periods of recession or expansion have an influence on particular death rates. Well, let's look first to children. This is the death rate of Finnish children ages 10 to 14. We notice that in this period between the 1970s to the present, this death rate has had a long run tendency to decline. But when unemployment rate increased here, indicating a recession, the decline was still going on. And when the death rate increased, when unemployment increased here in the recession of the 1990s, there is not any clear impact on the death rate of this ages 10 to 14. Let's look now to the elderly. This is the death rate for ages 80 to 84. Here we see declining death rate, and there is not any clear connection with the economic crisis of the 1970s or the 1990s. Now, this is different. This is the death rate for ages 40 to 44. What we notice here is that in this period in which the economy is expanding and unemployment rate is going down, this death rate tend to go up. And then when the economy goes into recession and the unemployment rate goes strongly up, the death rate for these ages, 40 to 44, goes down again. And something similar happens here. There is another recession starting here, and this coincides with an acceleration of the decline of the death rate at ages 40 to 44. Now, this is for ages 20 to 24, and what we notice here is the same as we noted for ages 40 to 44, but more marked, more dramatically shown, because here we have the period of expansion, unemployment going down, death rates going up, and then the recession starts here and death rates go very quickly down. So, summarize. First, pandemics produce major effects on death count. These are effects that are very easy to visualize because they are massive. Second, recessions and expansions produce small effects on deaths that can require detailed analysis of death rates, often at specific ages, to be detected. Third, recessions tend to reduce deaths, but a pandemic has a much bigger effect and increases deaths. Therefore, that is the predominant effect we will observe in 2020, where there is an economic crisis combined with the pandemics. However, for the moment, the present pandemic has had a much smaller impact on deaths than the 1918 flu pandemic. Worldwide estimates are around 300,000 deaths produced by the COVID-19 pandemic until May 2020. Well, this is very small number compared with 50 to 100 million deaths in the 1980 pandemic. And this was a time when the world population was about a quarter of the present population. For all these reasons, I believe that this situation of a pandemic combined with a deep world economic crisis is a completely new situation. We are therefore in a unknown territory, and there are many possible evolutions that can happen. And this is all. Thank you very much. This is a book by Alfred Crosby that I recommend you as a good reading on the influence of 1918 that perhaps can teach us things on the present pandemic.